Too big for me, but I'll try. Alien noblewomen struggle on the planet Luminara. The towering cityscapes gleamed with polished silver and crystal, housing the Empire's most powerful beings, the Xenophians. These giants were a proud species, standing an average of 12 feet tall, with skin that shimmered like polished marble. Their civilization was ancient and vast, their technologies beyond anything Earth had imagined. They ruled over countless worlds, and had long considered themselves the apex of intelligence and strength in the galaxy. At the heart of this empire sat Empress Zoraktha, a regal and dignified ruler, commanding respect not only from her own people, but from the many species that submitted to her empire. Zoraktha had seen many visitors in her time, alien ambassadors, diplomats, and traders. None had ever truly impressed her. She viewed their attempts to impress her as little more than games. After all, how could any species be truly worthy of her attention when they could never match the Xenophian strength or intellect? Yet, things were changing. Humanity had suddenly exploded onto the galactic scene, surprising everyone. Humans, once a small, insignificant species on a backwater planet called Earth, had quickly established themselves as formidable players. Their ships traveled faster than expected, their tactics were innovative, and their diplomacy sharp. Soon, humans had begun to form alliances, and their influence spread rapidly across the stars. Zoraktha was curious but cautious. She had heard of the human species but had not yet encountered them in person. That is, until one fateful day when she received an invitation to meet their envoy, Commander Dean Harrison. When Dean arrived at the palace of Luminara, Zoraktha couldn't help but feel a strange curiosity stirring within her. As the shuttle doors opened, she saw the human step out. He was short by Xenophian standards, only 5'10", dressed in a formal but simple human military uniform. His posture was straight, his eyes sharp with intelligence, but his size, it was almost laughable in the presence of the towering Xenophians. Zoraktha couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. The human looked confident, almost too confident for someone so small. She noted his calmness as he walked towards her throne, giving her a respectful but not subservient nod. There was something in his demeanor that demanded her attention, even though his physical stature was nothing compared to the grand beings around him. "Commander Dean Harrison," Zoraktha said, her voice deep and commanding, "it is an honor to meet you. We have heard much about your species. Tell me what brings humanity to my empire." Dean smiled politely. "Thank you for receiving me, Empress Zoraktha. I'm here to discuss a possible alliance. The universe is growing more dangerous every day. We believe humans and Xenophians can achieve great things together." The Empress studied him carefully. Humans had come to her empire before, asking for alliances, but they had all been weak, asking for protection, asking for resources. They were never confident, never assertive. But here was this human standing before her, no sign of fear in his eyes, no hint of desperation in his tone. Zoraktha leaned forward, intrigued. "An alliance? You, a species that has barely begun to expand beyond your homeworld. You must have a great deal of confidence to come here and speak of such things." Dean didn't flinch. "It's not about confidence, Empress. It's about survival. We've learned to adapt. The human spirit can't be easily crushed. That's why we believe we're a worthy partner." Zoraktha found herself fascinated. The arrogance of humans was something she hadn't expected. Most species were terrified when faced with the unknown, but here was this human, so bold and so sure of himself. Perhaps there was more to humanity than just their small stature. "You think your spirit is enough to stand against the challenges we face?" Zoraktha asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Dean nodded. "Yes, I do. Our spirit, our creativity, and our willingness to do what it takes, that's what sets us apart. We fight for each other, and when we stand together, we're stronger than anyone realizes." Zoraktha studied him in silence for a moment. There was something about this human, something that was not so easily dismissed. She had encountered many diplomats and leaders in her time, but none had spoken with such assurance. It was almost as if he was daring her to underestimate him. "Well, Commander Harrison," Zoraktha said, leaning back in her throne, "you've certainly piqued my curiosity. But I will not make a decision on such an important matter based solely on your words. I will need to see your worth for myself." Dean grinned, sensing the challenge. "I would expect nothing less, Empress." The following day, Zoraktha arranged a series of tests for Dean, not to measure his strength, for that would be a farce. How could a human compete with the raw power of a Xenophian? No, the tests would be intellectual, diplomatic, and strategic. Zoraktha intended to see if Dean's claim about humanity's value held any weight. The first test was a simple puzzle, a large cube made of interlocking pieces that had baffled the greatest minds of the Xenophians for centuries. Zoraktha watched as Dean took the cube in his hands, examining it carefully. His eyes narrowed as he flipped the pieces over, studying the patterns. After only a few minutes, he made his first move, twisting a section of the cube in an unexpected direction. Zoraktha's eyes widened slightly. It was a strange solution, one that no Xenophian would have thought of. He continued to manipulate the pieces, moving with a sense of calm precision, until finally, with a soft click, the puzzle was solved. Zoraktha blinked. It had taken the best minds of her empire weeks to make progress on that puzzle, yet this human solved it in less than half an hour. Dean looked up, a little smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I'm glad I passed the first test, Empress. Now about that alliance." Zoraktha's gaze was sharp, but there was a flicker of respect in her eyes. "You are more than you appear, Commander, but this was only one test. There will be more." Dean simply nodded. "I'm ready for them." The second test was a diplomatic one. Zoraktha had arranged a meeting with several alien ambassadors, each representing a different species, some hostile, others neutral, and a few that were outright antagonistic to humanity. The challenge for Dean was to broker a deal that would prevent a major war from breaking out between the species over a disputed planet. Zoraktha was curious to see how Dean would handle the various egos in the room, each ambassador wanting something different, each one trying to outmaneuver the others. But Dean remained calm, focused. He listened, he asked questions, and when the moment was right, he spoke. He used logic, humor, and a deep understanding of human nature to appeal to the diplomats. He didn't try to dominate the conversation. Instead, he let them speak, gaining their trust with each word. By the end of the meeting, a tentative agreement had been reached, something that Zoraktha had thought impossible just hours earlier. Dean stood, his hands behind his back. "I believe that's a start. There's still much more to be done, but I think this is a good foundation for us to build on." Zoraktha watched him with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. This human, he wasn't just some minor species after all. There was power in his mind, in his words, in the way he carried himself. As Dean left the palace that evening, Zoraktha stood at her window, gazing out over her empire. She had expected to dismiss him as a curiosity, but now she was beginning to wonder if humanity was something more than a passing fad. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were something that could help her empire reach even greater heights. She would need to see more to learn more, but for now the human had certainly earned her attention, and that in itself was a victory. The palace of Luminara was filled with excitement. The air seemed heavier with anticipation, as if the very stones of the building could sense that something important was about to happen. Empress Zoraktha had made it clear that she would test the human envoy, Commander Dean Harrison, in a series of challenges. After all, she could not simply take his word for it. He had claimed that humans were worthy of an alliance, and she had to see for herself if they were truly capable of standing with the mighty Xenophians. Zoraktha watched from her throne room as Dean prepared himself for the next series of tests. He had passed the puzzle with ease, impressing her, but that had been just the beginning. Now he was about to face a test that would challenge his diplomatic skills, the most important test of all. "Today, Commander Harrison," Zoraktha said in a voice that echoed through the vast hall, "you will deal with the Council of Lords. They are the most powerful and influential members of my empire. If you are truly worthy of our alliance, you must win their approval. If you fail, there will be no agreement." Dean stood tall, meeting her gaze. There was no hint of fear or doubt in his eyes. "I understand, Empress, I'm ready." Zoraktha's lips curled into a slight smile. "We shall see." The council chamber was large, with walls made of shimmering glass and an array of exotic plants that seemed to glow in the dim light. The lords, each one a towering figure of Xenophian stature, sat in a semicircle around a long, polished table. Their faces were stone-cold, their expressions unreadable. Zoraktha took her place at the head of the table, watching with keen interest as Dean walked in, his footsteps measured and calm. "Commander Harrison," Zoraktha began, her voice like a thunderclap in the silent room. "The lords of the Xenophian Empire have gathered to hear your case. You will convince them or you will leave with nothing. Make your argument." Dean nodded and stepped forward. He didn't need to take a seat. He wasn't here to be passive. This was a battle of words, of strategy, and of understanding. He was here to prove that humanity was more than just a species to be overlooked. The galaxy is full of powerful species, but none understand the importance of survival like humans, Dean began. "We don't rely on size or strength alone. We've built our strength through adaptability, ingenuity, and unity. We have faced extinction countless times, but we always rise. I believe that together we can overcome anything." The lords exchanged skeptical glances, but Zoraktha's face remained neutral. The room was silent for a moment, as if the weight of his words hung in the air. Then Lord Karnak, a massive Xenophian with dark blue skin and piercing eyes, leaned forward. "And what do you offer us, human? What can your people give us that we cannot obtain on our own?" Karnak's voice was deep, almost shaking the air around him. Dean didn't hesitate. "Humans are resourceful. We've developed technologies that your people have not yet mastered, ways of extracting energy, systems of communication, and methods of warfare that are uniquely ours. But more than that, we offer our loyalty. Once you ally with us, we will fight alongside you in any battle, no matter the odds." Karnak snorted. "Loyalty? Your species is young and untested. What makes you think we should trust you? What's to stop you from turning on us once you have what you want?" Dean's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained steady. "Because we understand that alliances are built on trust, not fear. We've seen too many empires fall when trust is broken. We've lost too much, and we've learned from that. A partnership with humanity is not one of convenience, it's one of necessity." Zoraktha's eyes glinted. She had been watching the exchange carefully, impressed by how Dean handled the tension. He wasn't just throwing words at them. He was speaking from the heart, and it was beginning to show. Even the hardened lords were paying attention. Lord Vorak, a thin, sharp-featured Xenophian with silver-gray skin, spoke next. "Your words are bold, Commander. But your species has been known to destroy its own kind in the pursuit of power. How do you justify such violence?" Dean sighed, the weight of the question clear in his eyes. "I can't justify the past mistakes of humanity. We've made mistakes, huge ones. But that's why we fight so hard now to protect each other. We understand what happens when power is abused. We've learned from it and will keep learning. That's why we make better allies now." There was a brief silence as the lords exchanged glances. Zoraktha could see the doubt in their eyes beginning to waver. There was something about the human's conviction that was infectious. Zoraktha herself leaned forward slightly, intrigued by the turn of events. "You claim to have learned, Commander, but how can you prove that? How can you prove that humans will not turn on us the moment they grow strong enough?" Dean stepped forward, his voice growing more intense. "I can't prove it with words alone, but I can prove it with actions. My people may be small, but we are not weak. We've fought wars and survived, not because we were stronger than our enemies, but because we never gave up. I don't know what the future holds, Empress Zoraktha, but I know that if we stand together, we can face it, whatever it is. And I believe that you will find over time that the strength of humanity is in our will to keep going, no matter the cost." The lords were silent for a long time. It wasn't often that anyone, especially a human, could speak with such conviction. Zoraktha studied them, knowing this was a critical moment. Finally, Lord Karnak spoke again. "We are not so easily convinced, Commander, but there is something about your words, your determination, your confidence. We will allow you another test to prove humanity's worth." Dean's expression remained serious. "What kind of test?" Karnak smiled, though it was anything but warm. "You will face our trial of strategy. You will lead a mock battle against one of our greatest tacticians. If you win, we will consider your words more carefully." Zoraktha, though intrigued by Dean's progress, knew this test would be difficult. The Xenophian tactician he was to face was no ordinary opponent. He was a master strategist, known for outwitting even the brightest minds of the Empire. But she also knew that Dean had a way of thinking outside the box, of seeing patterns others missed. Dean glanced at Zoraktha, then nodded. "I accept." The battlefield was set, an open, holographic map of a contested region of space. Dean stood at the center of the strategy table, his mind racing as he studied the map. On the other side of the table sat Talon, a tall Xenophian with piercing amber eyes, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "You may begin," Talon said, his voice cold and precise. Dean took a deep breath and began making his moves. He started with a simple but effective maneuver, baiting Talon into spreading his forces thin. The Xenophian tactician didn't seem fazed, but Zoraktha could see the subtle shift in his expression. Dean was making him think, something that was no easy feat. For the next hour, Dean and Talon exchanged moves, countering each other at every turn. Dean's tactics were unorthodox, often using feints and misdirections that made Talon second-guess his every decision. Zoraktha watched in awe as Dean managed to outmaneuver the Xenophian tactician with surprising ease. In the end, Talon was forced into a corner, his forces spread too thin to mount a successful defense. Dean had won. As the simulation ended, Zoraktha stood up, her gaze fixed on the human. "You have done what few could, Commander Harrison. Your strategies are unlike any I have seen before." Dean exhaled slowly, his eyes still locked on the now silent Talon. "I've always believed in looking for the unexpected solution. That's what humans do best." Zoraktha nodded, her mind racing. The human had passed her tests, and he had done so in a way that made her think. There was more to humanity than she had ever imagined. "Perhaps," Zoraktha said quietly, "there is more to your species than I thought." The skies of Luminara darkened. The calm that had reigned over the planet for centuries suddenly shifted, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Empress Zoraktha stood on the balcony of her palace, gazing out over the sprawling city below. It was a quiet afternoon, but something in the air felt wrong. Her instincts, honed over decades of leadership, told her that danger was near. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden arrival of her chief advisor, Vorak. His face was pale, his steps hurried. "Empress," he said, breathless, "there is urgent news. The Vorathians have launched an attack on our outer colonies. They're advancing faster than we anticipated." Zoraktha's heart skipped a beat. The Vorathians were a notorious alien race known for their brutal tactics and ruthless conquests. They had been a thorn in the side of the Xenophian Empire for years, but Zoraktha had always considered them a minor threat. Now, it seemed, they were poised to strike at the very heart of her empire. "What's their objective?" Zoraktha asked, her voice steady but her mind racing. "They're after the gemstone belt, a valuable resource that we control. If they seize it, they'll gain control of one of the richest sources of energy in the galaxy, Vorak replied, his voice tense. We need to act fast, or they'll have the entire region within days. Zoraktha's mind raced as she processed the information. The gemstone belt was crucial to her empire's power. Without it, the Xenophians would lose their dominance. But even more pressing, the Vorathians' invasion could lead to chaos throughout the galaxy. If they were allowed to advance unchecked, many other worlds would fall into their hands. Zoraktha's eyes narrowed. "Prepare the fleet," she commanded. "We'll meet them at the gemstone belt. I'll lead the charge personally." In the war room of the palace, a group of Xenophian generals and military advisors had gathered, preparing for the impending battle. They were all familiar with the Vorathians, but none of them had ever faced an invasion on such a scale. The war was about to be fought in space, where sheer power and tactics would determine the victor. Zoraktha stood at the head of the table, her gaze fixed on the star maps projected in front of her. "We have one chance to stop them," she said, her voice cold and resolute. "We can't afford to lose the gemstone belt. Gather the fleet and prepare for battle." Just as she turned to issue another command, the doors to the war room opened and Dean Harrison stepped in. His expression was serious, and he didn't wait for anyone to address him. He walked directly to Zoraktha, his eyes meeting hers. "You're about to lead a battle against the Vorathians," Dean said, his voice firm but respectful. "I need to be a part of this." Zoraktha raised an eyebrow. "You're a diplomat, Commander, not a soldier. You've proven yourself in strategy and negotiation, but this is war." Dean's jaw tightened. "I may not be a soldier, but I've led my people through their darkest times. Humans are survivors. We fight when we need to. I may not have your strength or size, but I know tactics, and I know how to inspire those around me. If you want to win this battle, I'm your best chance." The room fell silent. Zoraktha regarded him for a long moment. She had seen his mind in action before, his quick thinking, his ability to see solutions when others were stuck. Perhaps his involvement wasn't such a terrible idea. She nodded slowly. "Very well," she said. "You may join us, Commander, but you will follow my lead." Dean gave a brief nod. "Understood." The next few hours were a blur of activity as the fleet prepared for battle. Xenophian warships, sleek and deadly, were lined up in formation, their energy shields glowing in the dark expanse of space. The commanders and crew were at their stations, ready to engage the enemy. Zoraktha and Dean stood side by side on the bridge of the flagship, the Eclipse, watching as the vast fleet gathered around them. The tension in the air was thick. Every officer, every soldier aboard the ship knew the stakes. This wasn't just about resources. It was about the survival of their way of life. "Commander Harrison," Zoraktha said, her voice low but filled with authority, "I will trust you to coordinate with our forces in the rear. Your job is to create a diversion and draw their attention. This will allow our main fleet to flank them and deal a decisive blow." Dean's eyes narrowed. "Understood. We'll keep them busy, but you'll need to give us enough time to make it work." Zoraktha nodded, her expression hardening. "Don't fail us." As the Eclipse surged forward, the rest of the fleet followed, cutting through the void of space with deadly precision. The Vorathian fleet, a massive collection of warships, appeared on the horizon, their hulls glinting ominously in the distance. The battle began in an instant. Laser fire and plasma blasts lit up the space between the two fleets as both sides clashed in a flurry of motion. The Xenophian ships were larger and more powerful, but the Vorathians were relentless, their ships moving with terrifying speed and precision. Zoraktha's fleet fired back with all their might, the sound of explosions reverberating through the ship. Dean's role was clear. He had been given a small fleet of human warships to create a distraction. The human ships, though smaller and less powerful than the Xenophian vessels, were agile and quick. Dean led his forces with a steady hand, weaving through enemy lines and drawing fire away from the larger Xenophian ships. "Stay in formation," Dean shouted into his communicator, guiding his fleet with calm efficiency. "We need to keep them off balance." Zoraktha watched the battle unfold from her command station. She was impressed by how effectively Dean's forces were handling the distraction. The Vorathians, thinking they had an easy target, were now scattered, trying to chase down the smaller, faster human ships. The strategy was working. The Vorathians were distracted, and Zoraktha's fleet began to maneuver into position. With a commanding gesture, she signaled her fleet to close in on the enemy's flanks. The larger Xenophian ships advanced with heavy firepower, cutting through the Vorathian lines with ease. But just as Zoraktha thought victory was within her grasp, a sudden wave of Vorathian reinforcements appeared from a nearby asteroid field. The battle was far from over. The Xenophian fleet was now under threat from two sides. "Commander Harrison," Zoraktha's voice crackled through the communication system, "we need you to hold them off. The reinforcements are too many. I can't get a clear shot at their command ship." Dean didn't hesitate. "I'll draw them in. Just keep the pressure on their flanks." With a sharp command, Dean ordered his ships to make a daring move, leading the Vorathians into the heart of the Xenophian fleet. The tactic was risky, but it worked. The Vorathian ships, eager for a kill, followed the human ships into the trap. The Xenophian fleet closed in, delivering a devastating blow to the reinforcements. The Vorathian ships were scattered, their lines broken. Zoraktha saw her opportunity. With one final, coordinated strike, the Xenophian fleet launched a barrage of firepower, crippling the Vorathian command ship and forcing their forces into retreat. The battle was over. As the final remnants of the Vorathian fleet fled into the darkness of space, Zoraktha stood at the helm of the Eclipse, her heart pounding with adrenaline. The battle had been fierce, but the Xenophians had emerged victorious. It was a hard-won victory, and Zoraktha couldn't deny that Commander Dean Harrison had played a pivotal role in it. Dean walked onto the bridge, his face tired but satisfied. "That was a close one," he said, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. Zoraktha looked at him, her eyes softening for the first time since their first meeting. "You did well, Commander. Your tactics, they saved us." Dean smiled, though he knew this victory wasn't his alone. "We did it together, Empress. Humanity and Xenophia." Zoraktha nodded, her gaze turning toward the stars. "Yes, together." The galaxy was changing. Luminara, the heart of the Xenophian Empire, had just won a major battle against the Vorathians, a ruthless enemy. Yet the victory came at a cost. The war had shaken the foundations of Zoraktha's empire, and as much as she longed for peace, she knew the next challenge was already waiting on the horizon. Standing on the balcony of the palace, Empress Zoraktha gazed out at the bustling city below. The air was filled with a quiet sense of accomplishment, but there was also tension. The Vorathians had been pushed back, but the threat they posed still lingered. Zoraktha could feel it in her bones. She had no illusion that this war was over. However, one thing had become clear: humanity was a key ally. Beside her stood Commander Dean Harrison, his eyes also fixed on the horizon. The battle they had fought together had solidified something more than just a temporary alliance. It had formed a bond, not just of military necessity but of mutual respect and understanding. Zoraktha had underestimated him. She had underestimated humanity. Dean looked at Zoraktha, his voice breaking the silence. "It's not over yet, is it?" Zoraktha's lips twitched in a rare half-smile. "No. The Vorathians will regroup, but we have proven that we can face them and survive." She turned her gaze toward him, her eyes softening slightly. "And we've done it with your help. I never thought I'd say this, but I believe humanity has earned a place in the future of this empire." Dean smiled, but it was a humble smile. "I'm just one man. It was all of us working together, humans and Xenophians." Zoraktha looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You speak the truth." But it's not just about what you've done in battle, Commander. It's about your belief in something greater than yourselves. That is what makes you dangerous." Dean chuckled. "Dangerous? I don't know about that." "I do," Zoraktha replied, her voice low but firm. "You're dangerous because you believe in your people's potential. That belief makes you stronger than many of the species I've known. It makes you resilient." Dean didn't respond immediately. He thought about her words. It wasn't just about winning wars or gaining power. It was about building something lasting, something that could endure. The more he spent time with Zoraktha, the more he realized how different the Xenophians were from humans. They were ancient, proud, and set in their ways. But humanity was still growing, still learning, and that gave it a strength of its own. "I appreciate that, Empress," Dean said quietly, "but I think the real danger is in letting our belief cloud our judgment. We need to work together, not just fight together. If we're going to keep the galaxy safe, we can't let our differences pull us apart." Zoraktha's gaze never left him. "You're right, but unity requires sacrifice." Dean nodded. "And trust. You've trusted us in battle. Now we have to trust each other to make decisions for the future." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of diplomacy, strategy, and planning. With the Vorathians temporarily driven back, the focus shifted to rebuilding and fortifying the Empire's defenses. Zoraktha and Dean worked closely, their collaboration proving to be more than just a military partnership. They were shaping the future of the Xenophian-Human Alliance. The Intergalactic Council convened to discuss the aftermath of the war and the next steps. Zoraktha stood at the head of the council, flanked by her generals and trusted advisors. Beside her was Dean, now regarded as a trusted ally, not just a human envoy. He was no longer just a diplomat. He had earned a place at the table. As the council members settled into their seats, Zoraktha addressed them with her usual authority. "The Vorathians may have been defeated for now, but we must remain vigilant. They will return, and we must be ready." Her voice resonated across the room, a reminder of the power and responsibility she held. But this time, there was something different in her tone, a willingness to listen. She turned to Dean, giving him a brief nod to take the floor. Dean stepped forward, his posture confident but not arrogant. "The Vorathians are just one threat. There are others out there, and we need to prepare for the possibility that new enemies may arise. But more than that, we need to focus on how we can prevent future wars. How we can protect the galaxy without constantly fighting." Zoraktha's sharp eyes met his. She had always been about power, control, and dominance, but Dean was talking about something else, something she hadn't considered before. "Humans have a saying," Dean continued. "The best way to fight a war is to avoid it in the first place. We need to build alliances, not just with military strength but with understanding. The universe is vast, and its people are as different as the stars. We need to focus on cooperation, not just conquest." There was silence in the room. Some of the council members exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond. Zoraktha, however, was deep in thought. She had always believed that strength was the key to survival. Yet Dean's words resonated with her. Maybe there was another way, a way where diplomacy and strength worked together. After a long pause, Zoraktha spoke again. "What you say is intriguing, Commander, but the Xenophians are not a race that gives in easily. Our way of life has always been about domination." Dean nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I get it, but maybe it's time to evolve. To evolve beyond the idea that power is the only way to secure peace. We've all seen how that ends." Zoraktha's expression softened, and for the first time, Dean saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. She had spent centuries shaping an empire based on strength, and now, for the first time, she was being asked to consider something different. "Perhaps you are right," she said quietly. "Perhaps we have relied too much on our strength and not enough on our alliances." The room was still, the silence heavy. Then one by one, the council members nodded, agreeing with the sentiment. The idea of a different path, a path of cooperation and unity, was beginning to take hold. It was not easy to change centuries of tradition, but the seeds of that change were planted. As the council session concluded, Zoraktha and Dean found themselves alone in the hallway of the palace. The weight of the decision was still heavy on Zoraktha's shoulders. This was not just about military tactics, it was about redefining the future of her empire. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than usual. "You've made me think in ways I never have before." Dean smiled, his expression warm but thoughtful. "You didn't need me to make you think. You've always had that power. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us of the bigger picture." Zoraktha's gaze turned to the stars beyond the palace. For the first time in her life, she felt as though she was looking at them with a new perspective. The universe was vast, full of possibilities. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about ruling it all. It was about finding the strength to work with it. As she turned back to Dean, she offered him a rare smile, one that was not just of respect but of partnership. "The future," she said, "is no longer just mine to control. It's ours." Dean's smile widened. "Yes, it is."